Good morning, brothers and sisters in Christ, and happy solemnity of Corpus Christi. Francis Xavier Nguyen Van Thuan grew up in South Vietnam, and as a little boy, he would accompany the parish priest to bring Holy Communion to his aunt who was dying more or less every day. After her death, he was asked, why were you so dedicated to going to bring Holy Communion to your aunt every day? And his answer was, using the words of St. John from today's Gospel, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you do not have life within you. Francis Xavier wanted that life to be with his aunt. Later on, as a young man, late teens, he would sense a call to become a priest, and he entered the seminary and was ordained in 1953. In 1967, he was ordained a bishop, the young age of 39. Some years thereafter, he was appointed by Pope St. Paul VI as the coadjutor Archbishop of Saigon. Before this appointment, Saigon had fallen to the communists and was renamed Ho Chi Minh City, so his appointment was rather controversial. Well, his installation came, and he was immediately arrested and thrown in jail. He would spend 13 years in prison. 9 of those years would be spent in solitary confinement. But in wisdom and faith, he was able, miraculously, by the providence of God, to request from his family items that would be essential for his health. And so he requested from his family that they send him a little bit of wine to help with his stomach pain. And along with that little bit of wine, some crumbs of bread were sent. And so with these, he was able to celebrate Mass in prison. His hand literally became an altar upon which the Eucharistic sacrifice was celebrated. 3 drops of wine, 1 drop of water, crumb of bread, this became the Eucharist. After he was released from prison, he was asked, what was it that really allowed you to keep going? What kept you strong in the midst of tortures, mistreatment, isolation, possible discouragement? What was it? His answer was the Eucharist. The Eucharist. It was what gave him life. It's what gave him strength. And so, brothers and sisters, today we're celebrating Corpus Christi. It's a day to rejoice that Jesus continues to remain among us in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you do not have life within you. Right? So this wasn't just some idea of, Francis Xavier Nguyen Van Thuan, right, in the 1970s and thereafter. This is the faith of Christians. It goes back to St. Paul. Jesus, but St. Paul in our second reading today proclaims that, when we gather for the Eucharist, it's the flesh and blood of the Lord that we are receiving. And when we participate in that, we receive the life of Jesus. The belief of St. Paul simply reflects the words that we just read from the Gospel of St. John. Jesus says, "My flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink." And we need to remember that Jesus was surrounded by a lot of doubters. They didn't believe him. They didn't believe that his flesh and that his blood were true food and true drink. And I love it. Those around him say, well, how can he give us his food to eat, his flesh as food to eat? How can he give us his blood as something to drink? Right? They didn't believe, they didn't understand. And what Jesus does not do is say, oh, you're right, it's just a symbol. Oh, don't take my words literally. Chill out, guys. That's not what he does. Instead, he actually ups the ante. Before they ask him that question in the Gospel of St. John, Jesus uses, in the original Greek, what would equate to, eating my flesh and eating my blood. But after they ask that question, we lose it in the English translation. But equivalent, more or less, in the Greek would be, unless you gnaw on the flesh of man. Unless you gnaw on my flesh, unless you drink my blood, right? Unless you chomp down on my flesh. So Jesus, with these words, he ups the ante. He just re-emphasizes this fact that his flesh is true food, his blood is true drink. And so, brothers and sisters, this is what Jesus taught. This is what the earliest Christians like St. Paul believed. This is what who would later become Cardinal Francis Xavier Nguyen Van Thuan believed. This is what you and I believe. And so if you want more life in life, go to the Eucharist. If you want strength in life, go to the Eucharist. If you want peace in life, go to the Eucharist. It's in the Eucharist that we encounter God's own life. But brothers and sisters, the story of Cardinal Vantuan is not simply a story of receiving the Eucharist. That he received the Eucharist, but then he conformed his life to the Eucharist. Because what is the Eucharist? Literally, it's Jesus giving himself to us. It's the one sacrifice of Calvary being represented to us here and now. And then, in the form of bread and wine, Jesus gives his very life to us, substantially present. That's what the Eucharist is. So it's Jesus continuing to give himself to us. And we who receive the Eucharist are called to then conform ourselves to this self-gift. We receive his self-gift and then make of our own lives a self-gift for those around us. And so this is exactly what Cardinal Vantuan did. I want to read for you some of his words. He says, "Each time I celebrated Mass, I had the opportunity to extend my hands and nail myself to the cross with Jesus, to drink with him the bitter chalice." Those he was able to give the Eucharist to while in prison, so this was before solitary confinement, he would invite them to pray this prayer. He said, "Lord, grant that we may offer the Eucharistic sacrifice with love, that we accept to carry the cross and to be nailed to it and proclaim your glory, to serve our brothers and sisters." And so this is what we call Eucharistic spirituality, right? Jesus gives himself to us, and then we turn around and go out and we give ourselves to others in loving service. And so may this Corpus Christi be a time for us to renew this reality. Yes, faith in Jesus, his true presence in the Eucharist. Receive him worthily, and then we go forth and we give ourselves to those around us. Mother Mary, please help us on this Corpus Christi to live this Eucharistic spirituality.